Welcome to the Humanities Team podcast with me, Steve Farrell. Humanities Team is an international spiritual movement whose purpose is to communicate and demonstrate the timeless truth that we are all one, with the divine and all life, caring for each other and the world we share, so that people's actions reflect this profound understanding within our generation. We believe that living this truth is essential to resolving the most chronic and acute world challenges and vital to creating a flourishing world of peace, harmony, and happiness. We offer transformative education programs in personal and spiritual development, and we host an annual event called Global Oneness Day. Similar to Earth Day, which galvanized the global environmental movement, Global Oneness Day has become a catalyst for spiritual activism and an integral part of the present-day global oneness movement, which represents a profound new paradigm in human culture. Humanities Team is the only global nonprofit organization working in transformational education. Since we are a nonprofit, there is no focus on growing profits or satisfying shareholders, and 100% of all revenue goes toward our work supporting conscious evolution, planetary awakening, and flourishing at every level of life. If you'd like to learn more about us or want to support our mission directly through donation or volunteering some of your time, please visit us online at humanitiesteam.org. And lastly, if you enjoyed this podcast, we'd be grateful if you'd leave us a review.
Let me tell you a little bit about Jean Houston, Lynne McTaggart, and Deborah Rozman, for those of you who may not know about them. I'm going to be somewhat brief. There are complete biographies for all three of our panelists on the Global Oneness Day page, so I'd encourage you to look at that. So beginning with Dr. Jean Houston is a scholar, a philosopher, one of the foremost visionaries of our time. She's a key founder of the Human Potential Movement, and she speaks at conferences, universities, and at businesses worldwide. In 1965, Dr. Houston and her husband, Robert Masters, created the Foundation for Mind Research. And in 1982, Jean founded the Mystery School, a school of human development that offers cross-cultural, mythical, spiritual studies. And she also leads a program in social artistry that's attended by leaders around the world. She's a prolific writer, author of over 26 books, and these books are all listed in her bio on the website. So I want to welcome Jean. She's joining us from Monterrey, Mexico.
Thank you, John. It's good to be with you.
Yes. Also, this is Lynne McTaggart. She's one of the preeminent spokespersons on consciousness and the science of spirituality. And some of you may be familiar with her award-winning books, which include the bestsellers, The Field, and The Intention Experiment, and The Bond. Lynne is also an architect of The Intention Experiments, a web-based global laboratory that enables thousands of people around the world to test the power of intention to heal the world. And I understand Lynne is in the process of releasing a new book that's going to share some of the findings from that amazing research. Deepak Chopra made this comment about Lynne's latest book, The Bond. Once in a very great while, a book comes along that shifts our sense of reality or extols a new way of living. Lynne McTaggart's extraordinary new book, The Bond, does both. So welcome, Lynne. Glad you can join us today.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here with everybody.
Wonderful. And just a few words about Deborah Rossman, who many of you may know. Deborah is the president and CEO of HeartMath, an amazing organization in Boulder Creek, California. HeartMath provides technologies that activate heart intelligence and dramatically reduce stress, improve health, enhance performance. And HeartMath technologies monitor heart coherence for mental and emotional harmony. HeartMath offers training programs and certification programs for professionals and has an online personal development program for individuals. Dr. Rozman's been a psychologist, an entrepreneur, and a business executive for over 30 years. She is the author of 8 books, and again, these books are listed on the Global Oneness Day website. Dr. Rossman speaks at conferences throughout the world as a key spokesperson on heart intelligence and the role of the heart in stress management, performance, and wellness. So welcome, Deborah.
Well, thank you. I'm just delighted to be here. I'm actually speaking from Boston at a Connected Health conference sponsored by the Harvard Hospitals, but I'm delighted to see that we're all represented throughout the world.
Thank you, and thank you all three for joining. And I'd love to just get right into the questions now. And I thought it could be inspiring to start with a question to Eugene about something we've talked about before this call. And, you know, as you are a pioneer in the whole human potential movement and have been focused for a long time on how human beings achieve our greatest potential, and also very focused on stories and the power of stories and the narrative that we create and the influence that has. So I was wondering if you could talk about and share your view, you know, what's an emerging story that you see around the human experience now of oneness and the whole arena of health and well-being. And that'd be a beautiful place to start the whole dialogue.
Thank you so much, John, and I'm so grateful to be with Deborah and my old friend Lynne. I think we're going to have ourselves a time. We will not bore God. I think maybe I'll start with the myth. Or if you don't like the word myth, then a healing fiction, although myth is good because a myth is something that never was but is always happening. It's like the coded DNA of the human psyche. And this is my story. As far as I know, I'm the only one who's made it up so far. It takes place 1,000 years in the future, which means it's now, because as we know from quantum physics, time past, time present, and time future are simultaneous. And maybe this story is sending waves, fractal waves, back from the future to the present to inspire us. It means that 1,000 years in the future, a young woman who is doing whatever is the equivalent of a higher degree, a doctoral degree at that time, takes on as her project looking at 100 planets. And these are 100 planets that have fairly high civilizations. And she notices many, many similarities between most of these planets, not all by any means. And the similarities is that they go through various stages of growth and development, and their mountains and their forests and their rivers, and then there are a whole great plethora of species in their equivalent of the Cenozoic era, many different species, many kinds of animals, many kinds of things that even we would not consider, you know, fishy birds and birdy elephants, etc. But there tend to be one or two dominant species, and often one dominant species, which carries on for tens of thousands of years until it begins to develop complex civilizations. And initially, the complex civilization she finds, especially those that are based indigenously with deep, deep feeling for the land and for the spirits of the trees and the animals, these civilizations tend to be matriarchal, or much more, the women are in deep, deep relationship of equality with the men. And then there often happens a great switch, and the great switch generally comes when nomads come along with their patriarchal gods and their patriarchal things, and the way the women are sort of kept in second rate, and they gradually begin to overwhelm these very peaceful societies. And then for some thousands of years, the men are very much, the male of the species is very much in charge. There then comes a time of where technology, science, sensibility, challenge, ecology requires a big shift, a kind of jump time, a punctuated equilibrium. the diseases become rife, and they become very good at seeming to cover the diseases and the malfeasance continues not simply with regard to the disease of the species, but the disease of all the other creatures and animals, and the disease of the planet herself. At this point, it is generally true that the women of the species, who had up to this time been relatively kept down, with brilliant exceptions, of course, begin to rise. And they rise gradually to attain a life partnership with the male of the species. It is then when the women of the species rise that things begin to shift, because with the women, the emphasis is on process rather than product, on coherence, on relationship, on making things grow and develop. Their inner space is equal to outer space, where the spiritual depth, as opposed to just the religion, the spirituality becomes more important than even the religious pacts. It is at this point that you find that the planets, the different planets, will either grow or die, evolve or perish. But the rise of women to full partner, the rise of the female of the species to full partnership with men seems to make a great difference, because it is an attitude which is relationship, order, synchronistic, based on radical empathy, and especially with deep, telling care of the planet. They become the stewards, the men and women alike become the stewards of the planet. When this happens, the great shift happens. And when the great shift happens, the planet moves on to be a true kingdom or queendom of spiritual, physical, psychological, and mythic realities, and the species of the dominant species begins to speciate, meaning it begins to move into new forms, new ways of being, new creativity, and the planet begins to bloom. But if this doesn't happen, then you find the planet begins to perish. Over 1 million years in the future, the beings are still carrying on, maybe about 1 million of them, but mostly they are terribly diseased and run around the planet, stumbling over abandoned electronic appliances. So her doctoral dissertation is on the great either-or, and I'm suggesting that our planet is one of the chief planets that she is studying, and what she discovers about our future, I do not yet know, but I know that those participants on this call will have some very good ideas.
Wow. Thank you, Jean, for sharing that. It's a great place to jump off from and have this whole discussion, as I think, without question, that time of shift is upon us. It is a time of, evolve or perish, and no question the rise of women and men together in partnership to become true stewards of life and oneness. And so I'd love to move from this jump-off place in the discussion of this powerful story and myth, which so reflects the reality of where we are, to open the topic. I'd love to ask you a question that go into what the greatest advances in paradigm shifts that are happening in science tell us about how this myth is becoming a reality in human consciousness, what we're learning. And you have done, I think, us all a really great service with, as a journalist and a researcher, in distilling down so much of what's happened across multiple fields in science, and these many paradigm shifts that are happening that, I think particularly your books, The Field and The Bond, have really inspired me and many of us. So I'm struck to, I'd love to ask you to bring in your perspective on that. I know it's hard to distill those two big bodies of work in one answer, but what can you share with us about what new science is showing us and the potential to tap into that for greater healing and well-being?
Well, we're in the process of rewriting our story, nothing less than that. And Jean has kind of alluded to that, and so I'll give a bit of a scientific perspective on that. you know, many things write the story we live by, but probably the greatest author of our story in modern times is science, because we give credence to science. We no longer give to religion and things like philosophy. And science for 300 plus years has described us in a certain way, human beings in a certain way, and from that description and the description of our universe, we determine how we're supposed to live. And for this 300 plus years, we have defined ourselves as separate entities, very well-behaved entities operating according to fixed laws in time and space. That's really what we got thanks to Isaac Newton. And we also got a story from the likes of Charles Darwin that all these separate entities were in competition. You know, Darwin was very influenced by theories of population explosion of the time. And so he concluded that life must proceed through struggle and competition. And although he never actually coined the term survival of the fittest, his ideas, thanks to mass printing, swept the globe, and they became a justifying principle for a lot of burgeoning movements, like industrialized capitalism and the like. And so here we have a paradigm from that time, from Newton's time, of competitive individualism. And that kind of separate story has defined, you know, we believed in our economic laws of the teachings of people like Adam Smith. We do best for society by looking after number one. And so we're now at the end point of that mindset. You know, this is what selfish looks like now. It's the breakdown of pretty much every aspect of our society, and that's where we see it. We see, you know, problems economically, we see crises politically, we see crises in our climate, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we hear it's the end of oil, we hear it's the end of food because of the end of the oil, et cetera. So I think what's really going on is the end of that mindset, that end of that paradigm. And so I think on a global level, what the science is demonstrating to us is that we actually are not meant to be separate. That was an inaccurate story. The new story that's emerging is really talking about a bond. And by bond, I mean from our subatomic particles to our relationship with our environment as individuals, to our relationship with everyone else in the world, and even our relationship as societies. There's a bond. And by bond, I mean a connection so integral and profound, it is impossible to say where one thing ends and another thing begins. And we see this in large-scale situations as communities, and we also see it individually, because the other aspect that is shifting now is a paradigm shift of what the human being is, what the individual human being is. And of course, we've also had this separatist and materialistic view of the human body, that we're invented according to a fixed blueprint of DNA that determines who we are, and we're built from inside out. But the new science coming forward is saying, no, that our genes are like a piano, just waiting to be played. And what play is, the player is not inside our bodies. The player is an environmental aspect, you know, the food we eat, the water we drink, the friends we have, you know, the sum total of how we live our lives. That determines whether those genes get expressed. So we as a human are also part of an integral larger system that is a bond that determines how our health will be expressed. So what we're moving beyond is, as a society, understanding that we are a collective. We're part of something bigger. I like to always say we're part of this quantum field, and that we are, the individual is insubstantial. It is part of a larger intergalactic superorganism. But on the individual level, biological level, in terms of health, the degree to which we move away from that materialistic view that the body is a collection of chemicals and electrical signaling is the degree to which we really understand health and how to attain it. Because right now, that's all we have, and that's why medicine is failing as well. Conventional medicine is failing and is now the fourth killer in the West behind heart disease, stroke, and cancer.
Wow. Yeah, and that's a shocking statistic that doesn't get much play in the mainstream media, which is something I'd love to come back to a little later. But Lynn, I think what you're sharing is so opens such a whole panorama of possibilities when we look at what epigenetics and the quantum physics it tells us about what the human body actually is and our connection to the whole. And I'd love to, at this point, ask you a question, Deborah, because in many ways I think the work that HeartMath is doing is actually an actual example of what this kind of paradigm shift in the science is when we apply that, when it's actually applied in technology and the kind of application that HeartMath is doing. And I personally had the experience in some of the work I've been doing with colleagues with mindfulness and leadership work to experience with licensed HeartMath practitioners the power of that technology and the power of bringing a group into heart coherence and so forth. So I was wondering, can you talk to us about that, the power of the heart and how heart and the marriage of technology to this new paradigm shift in medicine?
Sure. Well, it's interesting to look at how society goes through rhythms and evolution, and I think there's a purpose behind it all when you look backwards. So thousands of years ago, most of the ancient cultures referred to the heart as a source of wisdom, as a source of intelligence, and it was just assumed that the soul or one's connection with our deeper self was in our heart. And as science, medicine became more compartmentalized and reductionist in the 1600s with William Harvey and Isaac Newton and some of the things Lynn talked about, everything became parts and the brain was in control and the heart turned into just a blood pump. And so I think a lot of us know that our heart is more than a metaphor in terms of when people talk about listen to your heart, follow your heart, heartfelt, put your heart into it. All of these expressions have been relegated as metaphors in most modern societies, but we intuitively know there's something more to this heart than just that. And we say, I love you with all my heart. We don't say, I love you with all my brain. And that's humorous to people. And so what is it that that's pointing to? And the spiritual traditions of East and West have all talked about the heart as some connection to a larger self. And many meditation practices and prayer practices focus on the heart. And at HeartMath, we decided to really research this and see, is there a psychophysiology there that we can help people in some systematic way to connect with and access these qualities of the heart, because they are certainly what's sorely lacking in society is those heartfelt connections and wisdom. And so that's why the math and HeartMath was really to look at the science and the power of the heart. And what we found was that in the heart rhythm pattern, the beat-to-beat changes in our heart rate, we could see emotional state. We could see fluctuations in our emotions and would change immediately the fluctuations in our heart rhythms. And so that was the first modern indicator that there really was a link between our inner world and our physical heart. That could be proven. And so we developed techniques and technologies, and the technology you're referring to is either the M-Wave or the Inner Balance that helps people see their heart rhythm pattern in real time when they're hooked up to a pulse sensor that converts heart rate into the variation in heart rate into how much synchronization or coherence there is in the heart rhythm, which reflects our current spiritual connected or emotional state, positive emotions, uplifting emotions, genuine felt feelings of appreciation, gratitude, love, care, compassion, turn the heart rhythm pattern to its gorgeous sine wave, harmonious, coherent pattern. And stressful emotions, which don't mean bad, and I don't mean negative in the sense of bad, because we all experience moments or times of irritation and frustration and anger and anxiety and worry, those desynchronize the heart rhythm and desynchronize the heart and brain communication and create a chaotic or incoherent waveform. But what happens is when we let those stressful emotions run and rule us or just go on is not only they imbalance hormones and drain our nervous system and our energy, they really disrupt other rhythms in the body because the heart rhythm is the master rhythm. So our higher cortical functions shut down and move into more of a fight-flight reaction as survival. Our sleep rhythms are disrupted, our circadian rhythms, our metabolic rhythms are disrupted, our hormonal rhythms are disrupted. And when we look at this kind of stress as a new norm, as much as society is doing today, we're entrained in living in fairly chronic, stressful emotions, constant underlying angst or frustration or quicker to trigger. We're bathing our whole organs and nervous system and brain and heart and body in these desynchronized energies, and we don't have our highest best self to perceive life from. We aren't really connected with our deeper heart or who we really are. And so no wonder society is playing out the way it is in all of our separative, self-centered, survival behaviors. So HeartMath, we basically said, let's give people the power to reconnect with their heart, with that place inside them that can synchronize heart, brain, and nervous system, and see when they're in that state through the technology you mentioned, John, the heart rate variability, the heart rhythm technology, and help them increase the coherence or synchronization in their internal systems, because as the research is showing, that's going to give them clearer signal access to their intuition, to their heart's wisdom. It's going to facilitate and open up the frontal lobes and the higher cortical function. It's going to put the heart, brain, body in its resonant frequency to who we really are, whether you call it your higher self or soul or source, and with other people's hearts. And so the technology that HeartMath created, and our mission has always been, is to help people reclaim that and use science to do that and understand how it can serve you to connect your heart to who you really are and then connect with each other. And so as we have more individual coherence, it increases our social coherence because our heart's energetic field, the electromagnetic field, let alone the quantum field, is constantly communicating like a radio transmitter and receiver with everybody else's heart field, especially people, close association at work or at home. And we're always exchanging energies, feeling energies, whether we're conscious of it or not. But our heart's also connected to a field of energy that's beyond time and space, as research is showing. The heart picks up through intuition, intuitive feeling, information that is outside of time and space. And then it transmits that information to the brain, which then formulates it into words and into the nervous system responses. So it's fascinating that in science we're able to map a lot of this, and yet we're just getting started. But the real power of that is to give people the power, the reassurance that it's not only fine to surrender the mind to the heart, but the mind is actually going to become the winner in that, become more intuitive, more creative, more intellectually connected to source and wisdom, and that the heart really needs to be brought back to center stage as our connection with source and our connection with each other. And, of course, as our greatest healer. And you talk about health and wealth, that has to be directed by our heart, and our heart coherence can access what's best for the wholeness, which we're part of. And that's certainly what the technology's been designed to do, and our Global Coherence initiative designed to help people take that globally. So we look at the M-Wave technology as like a Trojan horse. Whatever reason people use it, whether it's for health or whether it's for meditation practice or whether it's for reducing anxiety or doing better on the golf course, improving test scores, getting into coherence, synchronization, they would come back to their heart and discover who they are.
Beautiful. No, it's quite amazing what heart math has been able to verify scientifically and demonstrate in quantifiable ways, which is the way many people need to see it and understand it. But you really you raised so many beautiful points that really echo the point that Lynn brought up and where Jean started, that this ability for us to use things like the heart math technology to come into a greater coherence within ourselves and with others, and the healing, inherent healing nature of that. And what I'd love to do at this point is I have some other questions that have come in also from online, and some other questions that I could ask, but I think I'd love to pause for a moment and ask the three of you if there's anything you want to share or ask each other in reflecting on what we've talked about so far. Particularly, I think, in the spirit of realizing the story, the great myth that Jean started with, that how do we come to this, through this evolutionary turning point that we're in as it relates to health. And I just open up any...
Yeah, I have a few thoughts from this and hearing these wonderful expositions from Lynn and Deborah, because a big question that comes up for me is, given that we are looking at our bodies and our minds and the forms in which we can move into higher orders of health, but still we are ensconced in societies. And it occurs to me that, how to have a co-creative movement between the health of societies and the health of the body-mind system. And I think this requires a move toward politeia. Politeia is a Greek word that is much juicier than politics, which derives from it. I mean, what is politeia? Politeia is a healthy society. Politeia is civic society carried to its utmost. And it implies that all free citizens are actively involved in creating and maintaining the health of their community. I mean, truly empowering each other to further their common social agenda. In our unique time especially, it requires the plumbing of our emotional depths, the manifesting of our mind's best thinking, and above all, the courage to sustain it and to follow through. So I would say that as faith, hope, and love are to spirituality, so politeia is to politics. So what I'm proposing here, or thinking about proposing, is not merely for local community. I think that we are probably on the verge of a planetary civilization within the next 50 years with high individuation culture. But how to think locally about this? And so I was just thinking, what would it be to have a world society of relatively happy and safe people, positively overcoming difficulties, and in a position to realize much fuller potential and health as human beings. I mean, no longer can we afford to live as half-light versions of ourselves. And then, of course, an ecologically friendly civilization. That is the heart and soul of a healthy society, which not only avoids harming nature, but also constructively enhances nature according to nature's own biomimicry, its own rules and needs. And then, of course, it occurs to me to have a world ecosystem, climate and atmosphere, well on the way to achieving a new bond, a new dynamic balance under wise management. A world society, this planetary civilization where different social and cultural and ethnic groups and regions and nations may appreciate their variations and sense their basic unity and commonality, truly, peacefully coexisting, reinforcing each other's identity, lifeways, cultural wealth, really joining what is now coming to be known as the collective commons. A world economy which is equitable, humanly, environmentally sustainable, operating in line with real human necessity, environmental sense, without damaging resources or people. Balanced population, clearly. Restoration, this is so important to me, the restoration of meaning and wonder to birth, to life, to death, and especially the matters of spirit and daily life. And of course, the healing of the wounds of nations, the emotional clearing and healing process of the core historic hurts within humanity, and the psycho-spiritual change of an individual collectively and culturally. And finally, a reconstruction of civilizations, the cities, the buildings, the technology, the management of nature, which reflects and enhances joy and creativity in the human soul. And this takes lifelong education that educates not just the whole child, but the whole person, and spiritual and psychological learning and growth and expression as natural as a general form, and ultimately a basic unity of human purpose which interweaves all these points, acting as the prime motivator in human life. Because without such qualities, I think survival of people, survival of species, survival of civilization is unlikely. And what they point to is, this is what I'm asking my friends here, what can engage the most radical change in our collective and individual consciousness, such as the world has ever known? What are the strategies both for personal health and collective community and world health?
Well, I would like to, that vision is phenomenal, and I think for moving towards the actualization of that, it really, my perspective, it has to start with there's inspiration of a vision, and then the individual coming into their own order, internal order of synchronization. There has to be emotional self-regulation and individual responsibility, and stress increasing and all the crazy stuff going on is actually, I think, a gift to help people get out of their slumber and focus more on what can I do, what must I do, because we're in pain. And too often, or very often, it's stress and pain and crises that invoke people to actually go to their heart and go into their heart to find answers, where they're accessing a deeper field of information, a deeper source of connection with themselves. So I see that as going on. I also see that science, well, and again, I'll take it back to the heart, is showing that with each heartbeat, our hearts, individually and collectively, are putting on a tremendous amount of power. And the heart's magnetic field is 5,000 times stronger than the brain. So as we get into heart coherence, we are energetically affecting the fields of everybody around us. So increasing numbers of people in individual heart coherence, taking responsibility for their emotions and their reactions and coming back into center, creates actually a field effect, a bond, but a field effect of social coherence, increases that field, conditions the field in our environments, in our workplaces and homes, helping each other become more be able to access our heart, our wisdom, and common sense, and inspiration, such as you just shared, which then motivate change and behavioral change and action. And we're actually seeing there's a feed-forward loop. As more people are and more social systems become coherent, there's a resonance with the Earth's magnetic field, the Earth's ionosphere and core magnetic field, which can add tremendous power to the conditioning of the field that can bring in more information and more resonance that can facilitate this radical shift you're talking about, because it's going to need a field effect to actually have as fast and a dramatic change as we all sense is needed. But it's actually happening. There's quite a lot of interesting research happening, and as there's individual coherence increases, but that's each one of us making that choice and co-creating that, then increases the social coherence, which has more impact and social impact, as well as effectiveness in our organizations, in our communities, in our workplaces, and our health. And then the global coherence is involving the Earth itself in this interactive feed-forward loop of heart coherence that wakens us to a higher dimensional plane of intelligence. And that's why we call it heart intelligence, because the access, you can't miss going to the door of the heart to access that. And then I think we will get the downloads we need to collectively co-create it. But it doesn't require everybody to become heart coherent on the planet, just a critical mass to create the field effect that can help accelerate this process. So that's the vision that, and the reality of the science we're starting to see, which gives us a lot of hope.
Thank you.
I think also I think that's so wonderful, Debbie. The whole idea of this, infectious field effect. And what I've been looking at, too, is a couple of things, both within medicine and also within the political and social arena. I mean, first of all, it's very interesting, I think, Jean, that there is this enormous move against the superstate that we're seeing in the world. We're seeing Scotland nearly seceding from the UK Union. We're seeing a huge move away from the superstate in Europe, just where I'm calling from, which is the UK where I live. We're seeing this in so many places, the inability of the superstate to really get anything done and move forward. And people are rebelling against that. So I think that there is a kind of spiritual activism on this kind of community level that really has to happen. Now, as you say, it has to be something more than just small communities. We're talking about really spiritually active communities, but small ones, and a move towards smallness that will end up being powerful and large. And so I see almost one of the things that I really stressed in the bond was how much we need to community to actually create health. I mean, there is so much scientific evidence demonstrating that probably the healthiest drug you can ever take is joining a group, joining a community. But we need community to survive. We need to belong more than anything else. And one of the sicknesses of our time has been this move toward huge individuation. And by that I mean not individual achievement, which is wonderful, but just the idea that we are lonely creatures on a lonely planet. And that is our zeitgeist at the moment. But we need to reconnect. And I think the most useful and spiritually active unit is the small group. And that's what I've been experimenting with, basically, is groups of 8 and 12 and, and then larger for things like intention experiments. And they are powerful vortices of energy. So one of the things that I encourage is really the connection to some sort of group. And as so many activists have known in the past, Margaret Mead used to say, that these are, social changes. The only thing that happens, and it starts with, is a small group. So I would like to see that on the, in the collective state is the power and the use of the small group. But I think also, something that is so important is to understand that this movement is not going to happen automatically. This isn't something that we're going to be able to sit back and just wait and be covered with fairy dust and we will evolve. We have to understand that we have to take an active part. And so one of the most important messages is to look to spiritual activism on an individual basis. And one of the wonderful things that I've discovered in some of the science that I've looked at is that human beings are hugely malleable, human beings are hugely influenceable, and that we are all master influencers. Even our thoughts are powerful influencers. They actually physically affect matter, and they physically affect other people. So it's not that difficult to be a spiritual instigator. And the final point I really want to make on this issue is how important it is to be a spiritual activist in pushing forward a new kind of medicine, a new kind of health care, because I've been in the thick of this for 2 years. I edit a magazine. Aside from my books, I edit a magazine called What Doctors Don't Tell You. And since it's been a magazine, it's been a newsletter for 25 years, and then a magazine, we've been the target of skeptic attacks by pharmaceutically backed organizations who have done everything from staged campaigns to get us out of the stores to reporting on our advertisers, just a hate campaign, a staged campaign to kill us. And it hasn't worked, luckily. It's actually backfired. But the point is, there's this kind of blowback to a new kind of medicine. The rear guard is dirty, and it's working in this kind of way. And so I think it means that all of us have to step up to the plate and make a very loud noise about the desire for change. And that can be in a very, very simple way in your office, just refusing to act a certain way or doing some sort of act of generosity. That, in these days, is an act of revolutionary fervor.
Yeah. I wanted to say, just invite a little more conversation along this whole theme of spiritual activism, because this is something we talked about on some of the earlier panels in the day, and the importance of, at this juncture, those of us that have a deeper connection to and understanding of oneness and all the principles we've been talking about on this call, for that not to remain a private experience. There are huge, I know in some of the connections before this panel we talked about, there are huge established institutions that are not going to sit, that don't sit idle, that actually are actively against these new holistic approaches to health. So I'd welcome any conversation on that, because my sense is, in a spiritual way, the ego never goes down easy. Egoic consciousness, and egoic consciousness and culture in these institutions won't go down easy without very passionate spiritual activism and awareness. So I just would open up any thoughts or comments in that direction.
I'd like to respond. If I may.
Go ahead.
Hello. Well, I was going to respond. First, of course, as you know, Lynn, I was the adopted daughter of a Margaret Mead. I had a wonderful mother, she was a wonderful daughter. That was our relationship. And so I was present at her death. And at her death, she said to me, "Forget everything I've been teaching you about working with governments and bureaucracies." I said, "Now you tell me this." She said, "Yes, I'm an anthropologist on my own dying, and I see that if we're going to grow and green our time and bring a new health to ourselves and to the planet, it's a question of people gathering together in teaching, learning communities, where they actually do work together. No guru it's spelled G-U-R-U, no guru, no money involved, but people growing in body, mind, and spirit." She said, "Doing your kind of work, other people's kinds of work, but work that enhances the human development, and then on the basis of that development, going out and having the wherewithal and the courage to really go and make a difference in whatever needs enhancing in the community." Now, I tell this story because I think she would now, well, she's been dead 30-odd years, but she would now really be one who would affirm the power and the necessity of spiritual activism, meaning people who gather together in group, together, they tap into source levels of the creative consciousness, because we are not encapsulated bags of skin dragging around very little, egos. We are organism environments. We are symbiotic with the whole, and thus with the whole we can tap in. We can, again, confirm, as Debbie has so beautifully shown, our rhythms. We can actually actualize the intention and the frequency, the field, if you will, wherein we get spiritual sustenance, creative support, the genius of the untrammeled mind, and that I think the patterns are there beneath the surface crust of consciousness, waiting for us to tap into them together, and then to come up with ideas, insights, and radical empathy to overcome the great divide of otherness and to go out and profoundly make a difference.
That's beautiful. I wanted to also underscore that, Lynn, what you brought up, the work in small groups as the vehicle for sustenance and spiritual activism, is something Andrew Harvey brought up in his comments earlier today and continues to come up. I want to just, as a timekeeper here, heads up, we've got another 2 or 3 more minutes left before we have to go into a wrap-up mode. So I would open, let's think, any parting thoughts. This has been a tremendously inspiring conversation. I really am honored by everything I'm hearing from all three of you. But any closing comments or thoughts that as we go to a wrap up?
Well, I just wanted to address this small group because that's how I totally want to say yes. As individuals and even a small group of people take responsibility individually in that group for their own emotional regulation, I call it, or their own heart coherence, and help each other with that, it creates a group field effect. It also brings in more intuition and creativity, or as you called, source connection for co-creativity, as Jean said, for that group, where incredible impact can happen. I mean, that's a little more of the science behind that. And people, I think, are being called, to resonate, to the rise of the human spirit is not just individual, it's collective. And so I think that gives us great hope. And I see that happening even within some of these survival, afraid, fearful companies, because a lot of the backlash we're seeing from government, from pharmaceutical companies, from the old guard is fear-based, it's threatened. And we're also seeing within those organizations, because HeartMath is training right in the middle of some of those companies, there's groups of people who are seeking us out, who want to make a difference, who don't want to work in an organization where there's more alignment and fulfillment. So it's going to come from within those organizations and within government as we create it from without and have more of that, follow our own hearts and direction. I think we're going to see magnificent and surprising changes happening, and very quickly in the next few years.
I think one of the really interesting things that is happening in medicine and health is you watch, I think right now, there was some amazing statistic, like 70% of the young doctors coming out in, for instance, the UK where I live, are choosing not to walk into the system of abuse that young doctors usually are subjected to. They are taking jobs as locums, substitutes, so that they can be a doctor without having to buy into that system. And I think you're seeing in the States a push toward integrative medicine, but it's going to need a push from us too. The doctors are trying to move toward that. They want to set medicine free. After all, they went into medicine with the idea of being a healer, and they've been sucked into and co-opted by the pharmaceutical industry, which is almost like a dragon without a head anymore. And as Debbie says so wonderfully, that there are individuals inside that who are deciding not to go along with that power-based and corrupt modus operandi. But it's still going to take, I think, a population to speak up, speak out, be active. And so what we're really talking about is voting with not just your ballot, but voting with your heart, voting with your wallet, voting with your feet, and living in every regard the change you want to see. And that just means, as I say, just one act, revolutionary act, can have an enormous ripple effect around the world. So I think all of us have to wake up and understand this will only happen with us.
Absolutely beautiful. A great way to great comment to maybe end on as we have to move into a wrap up. This is such a rich conversation and one we could continue for hours. I really want, just in part of the wrap up, I would ask, I know that all three of you, your bios are online with the Global Oneness Day site, but if you don't have, is that the place for people to go to get more information about you, or is there any other link you would mention now that was not included in the bios if people want to find out more about your work?
Well, I don't remember what was in the bios, but I would love to invite people to go to www.glcoherence.org. That's the Global Coherence Initiative website, glcoherence.org, and learn more about this incredible potential of individual social global coherence, so people can, membership is free, and there's over 55,000 members connecting in the heart and connecting as a virtual group, at least, to make a difference.
Excellent. Okay.
My JeanHouston.com is a good place for some of my recent activities, but also a new website, Rising Women, Rising World, where you see some of our work to empower the health and well-being of women all over the world.
Wonderful. I want to thank the three of you.
And may I just throw in too?
Yes, sorry.
I just wanted to let you know it's for me, Lynne McTaggart. It's LynneMcTaggart.com. www.lynnmctaggart.com for all of our activities, including our intention experiments, which are large and small experiments using the power of intention to change each other and and heal the world, and also What Doctors Don't Tell You, which is wddty.com, which is the magazine that attempts to provide an alternative to the drug-based approach.
Excellent. And having spent time at all those sites, the Rising Women, Rising World is a new one for me, but I urge everyone to go there. It's an incredible source of inspiring information. And on behalf of Humanity's team and everyone, on all the listeners, I want to thank you for your time today. It was excellent.
If you'd like to receive all of our new podcast episodes, please click on the subscribe button. To find out more about Humanity's Team transformational education programs and about how you can help support our mission, please visit us online at humanitiesteam.org, where you can also sign up for our email list so we can let you know about our free online events and other news about what we're up to each week. And again, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. Thank you.